You lied to me right to my face. Don't stand there and pretend you don't know what I'm talking about.
The moment Maverick Ashford's eyes locked onto the two little boys holding his ex-wife's hands, his entire world shattered into a million pieces. Those eyes, grey like storm clouds, were unmistakably his, and he had never known they existed. 4 years old, twin boys, standing 20 feet away in an airport terminal while he was about to board a private jet for his honeymoon with another woman. This wasn't supposed to happen. None of this was supposed to happen. But life has a way of forcing us to face the truths we've been running from. Have you ever discovered a secret so devastating that it made you question everything you thought you knew about your life? A secret that turned your greatest achievement into your biggest regret? A secret that made you realize the person you'd become wasn't the person you were meant to be? This is the story of a billionaire who had everything, a $3 billion empire, a picture-perfect wedding that made headlines, a honeymoon villa waiting in Bora Bora. He had power. He had prestige. He had a new wife on his arm. But standing in that airport terminal, watching his ex-wife pull two little boys closer to her side, Maverick Ashford realized the devastating truth. The one thing he truly wanted, the one thing money couldn't buy, had been hidden from him for 4 long years. And he was about to discover why. What would you do if you were seconds away from boarding a private jet for your honeymoon and saw your ex-wife with children you never knew existed? Would you get on that plane with your new bride? Or would you risk everything, your marriage, your reputation, your empire, for a chance to know the truth? Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what unfolds next will leave you absolutely speechless. This is a story about love, lost and found, about secrets kept and revealed, about a man who had to lose everything to discover what truly mattered. Welcome back to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, and if you're new here, you're in for something special today. Before we continue, do me a quick favor, hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and give this video a like. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like this one to life. Today's story will take you on an emotional journey through love, betrayal, redemption, and the unbreakable bond of family. You'll laugh, you might cry, and I promise you won't see every twist coming. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. It was a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of crisp autumn day that made New York City feel alive with possibility. At the private jet terminal of JFK International Airport, a different world existed. This wasn't the chaos of commercial travel, with crying babies and delayed flights and passengers fighting for overhead bin space. No, this was a sanctuary for the ultra-wealthy, a place where coffee came in fine china cups, where attendants knew your name before you spoke it, and where the biggest inconvenience was deciding which champagne to drink before takeoff. Maverick Ashford moved through this world like he owned it, because, in many ways, he did. At 34 years old, Maverick had built a technology empire valued at $3.2 billion. His face had graced the covers of Forbes, Bloomberg, and Wired. His name was whispered in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Tokyo. He was the kind of man other men wanted to become and women wanted to be seen with. Tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his custom Italian suit perfectly, Maverick had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His dark hair was styled with effortless precision. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. And his eyes, grey like storm clouds before rain, held the intensity of a man who had fought his way to the top and intended to stay there. He adjusted his Patek Philippe watch as he guided his companion through the exclusive lounge. The timepiece alone was worth more than most people's homes. A $250,000 statement of success wrapped around his wrist. But Maverick barely noticed it anymore. When you've had everything for long enough, everything starts to feel like nothing. "This way, Mr. Ashford," a uniformed attendant said, gesturing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the tarmac. "Your jet is being prepared now. Departure in 45 minutes. "Thank you," Maverick replied, his voice carrying that practiced politeness of the perpetually powerful. Beside him walked Penelope Winters, his wife of exactly 48 hours. Penelope was the kind of woman who belonged in this world. platinum blonde hair that caught the morning light like spun gold, cheekbones that photographers loved, a figure maintained by personal trainers and private chefs. She wore a designer dress that cost more than most monthly salaries, and diamonds sparkled at her ears, her throat, her fingers. She was beautiful, polished, perfect, and Maverick felt absolutely nothing when he looked at her. Bora Bora is going to be incredible, Penelope said, her voice carrying that particular excitement. She'd mastered, enthusiastic enough to seem genuine, controlled enough to remain elegant. The villa has its own private beach, crystal clear water. I've already coordinated with the photographer to capture some candid moments for my Instagram. My followers are going to lose their minds. She squeezed his arm with perfectly manicured fingers, nails painted, a tasteful nude that matched her lipstick, her shoes, her handbag. Everything about Penelope was coordinated, curated, calculated. Sounds wonderful, Maverick said, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been elsewhere for months, if he was being honest, maybe years. The merger documents he'd signed yesterday had pushed his empire past the $3 billion mark. He should have felt triumphant, victorious. Instead, he'd signed the papers with the same hollow efficiency he brought to everything these days. Another task completed, another milestone achieved, another box checked on a list someone else had written for him. Standing here now, about to embark on what should have been the happiest journey of his life, Maverick felt like an actor who'd forgotten why he'd auditioned for the role in the first place. The wedding 2 days ago had been a spectacle. St. Patrick's Cathedral, 400 guests, coverage in the New York Times, the society pages, the gossip columns. His mother had wept tears of joy, or perhaps relief. The board of directors had attended in force, treating the ceremony like a corporate merger, which, in many ways, it was. Penelope's father, Harrison Winters, controlled one of the largest investment firms on Wall Street. The marriage united two empires. It was strategic, sensible, smart. It was everything a marriage shouldn't be. Mav, you're doing it again, Penelope said, her fingers tightening on his arm, with just enough pressure to communicate displeasure without causing a scene. That distant thing. We promised, no business thoughts on our honeymoon. Sorry, he said automatically. Just thinking about, whatever it is, it can wait. Her smile was flawless, but it didn't reach her eyes. It never did. This is supposed to be our time. 2 weeks of sun, sand, and absolutely no spreadsheets. Maverick nodded, forcing himself to focus on the present moment. On his wife. On the private jet waiting to whisk them away to paradise. But as they walked toward the departure gate, a thought crept into his mind, the same thought. That had haunted him for 5 years, surfacing at the most inconvenient moments. This isn't the life you wanted. He pushed it away, as he always did. Some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that way. Or so he believed. The private terminal connected to the main airport through a series of elegant corridors. Maverick and Penelope passed through them, moving from their world of privilege toward the gate, where their jet awaited final preparations. For a few minutes they'd walk among regular travelers, a reminder, perhaps, of the life Maverick had left behind when he'd built his fortune. The corridor opened into a larger terminal space. Sunlight streamed through massive windows. The sounds of announcements, rolling luggage, and hundreds of conversations created a symphony of controlled chaos. Maverick barely noticed any of it. He was thinking about the quarterly projections, the Tokyo expansion, the new AI division that was hemorrhaging money but showed promise. 1,000 details that demanded his attention, even on the first day of his honeymoon. Penelope was saying something about the resort's spa services. He made appropriate sounds of interest without actually listening. This was what his life had become. Performance upon performance, with no intermission in sight. They were almost to the connecting gate when everything changed. The laugh cut through the noise of the terminal like a knife through silk. Rich, genuine, unguarded. The kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep, from a place of real joy rather than social obligation. Maverick knew that laugh. He'd fallen asleep to that laugh 1,000 times. He'd woken up to it on lazy Sunday mornings. He'd heard it over Chinese takeout at 2 in the morning. over bad reality, TV shows, over whispered jokes that only made sense to the two of them. He knew that laugh the way he knew his own heartbeat. His body turned before his mind could catch up. His feet stopped moving. His breath caught in his chest. "Mav?" Penelope's voice came from somewhere far away. "What are you?" He didn't hear the rest. Because there, 20 feet away, at the United Airlines family pre-boarding area, stood Knewℹ Mitchell. Time stopped. The noise of the terminal faded to a distant hum. The hundreds of travelers became shadows at the edge of his vision. The only thing that existed, the only thing that mattered, was the woman standing by the departure gate with 2 small children holding her hands. Knewℹ, his ex-wife, the woman he'd let walk away 5 years ago because he'd been too proud, too scared, too weak to fight for what they had. She looked different. The same, but different. Her natural hair was longer now, styled in gorgeous twists that framed her face like a crown. She wore a simple burgundy dress that somehow made her look more elegant than all the designer clothing in the terminal combined. No diamonds, no ostentation, just effortless, natural beauty that had always made him feel like the luckiest man alive. She was talking to the children, bending slightly to hear what they were saying, her face lit with that warm smile he remembered so well. The children. Maverick's gaze dropped to them, and the world tilted on its axis. Twin boys, couldn't be more than 4 years old. Identical in the way only twins could be, yet each with his own distinct energy. Their skin was a beautiful caramel, a perfect blend that spoke of 2 worlds coming together. Their hair was dark and curly. Their smiles were wide and innocent, but it was their eyes that made Maverick's heart stop beating. Grey, storm cloud grey, the exact same grey that stared back at him every morning in the mirror. "Mama, can we get pretzels on the plane?" one of the boys asked, tugging at Knewℹ's hand with the impatient energy of a 4-year-old. "The crunchy kind." "We'll see, Jalen," she replied, her voice carrying that patient warmth that had once made their penthouse feel like home. "You and Jackson need to be good listeners first. Can you do that for Mama?" "I can be good," the other boy, Jackson, announced proudly. "I'm the best listener. Better than Jalen." "No, you're not." "Yes, the first am." Knewℹ laughed again, and the sound drove a stake through Maverick's chest. Jalen, Jackson, his sons. They had to be his sons. Those eyes. That jawline already showing hints of the strong features they'd inherit. The way Jalen tilted his head when he was thinking, exactly the way Maverick did. He was moving before he made the conscious decision to move. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor with each step, carrying him toward the family he'd never known existed. The distance between them shrank, 15 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet. Knewℹ must have sensed something because she looked up at the last possible second. Their eyes met, and Maverick watched the blood drain from her face. Watched her expression shift from contentment to recognition to something that looked almost like fear. Watched her hands tighten protectively around her son's small shoulders, pulling them closer to her sides. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, neither of them moved. They just stood there, separated by 5 feet of airport terminal and 5 years of silence. The twins looked up at their mother with confusion. "Mama," Jackson asked, his voice small. "What's wrong?" Knewℹ didn't answer. She was staring at Maverick like he was a ghost, or maybe like she was the ghost, caught in a place she was never supposed to be. Finally, Maverick found his voice. "Knewℹ." Her name left his lips like a prayer and a curse combined. Like the first word of a story he'd thought was finished, but was only just beginning. "Maverick." Knewℹ's voice was steady, impressively so given the circumstances, but he knew her tells. He'd spent nearly 18 months married to this woman, learning the language of her expressions, the dictionary of her gestures. He saw the slight twitch of her left eyebrow, the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the protective stance she'd assumed, positioning herself between him and the boys like a shield. "I didn't expect—" She paused, recalibrating. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question." His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by shock and confusion, and something else he couldn't name. His gaze kept dropping to the twins. Jalen and Jackson, she'd called them. They had his nose, his jawline, his eyes, but they had their mother's deep brown skin, her full lips, her spark of curiosity as they looked up at this stranger who had interrupted their morning. "Mama, who's this?" Jackson asked, pressing closer to Kendria's leg. His small hand gripped her dress, bunching the burgundy fabric in his tiny fist. Kendria opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the moment like breaking glass. "Mav, what's going on?" Penelope appeared at his side, her designer heels clicking an impatient rhythm. "We're going to miss our—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her gaze swept the scene with the calculating precision of a woman who'd navigated high society her entire life. From Maverick's shell-shocked expression, to Kendria's protective stance, to the two little boys who looked unmistakably like, "Oh my God," Penelope whispered. The words were barely audible, but they carried the weight of dawning horror. Kendria's expression flickered, something complicated passing through her eyes as she took in Penelope's designer dress, her diamonds, her possessive proximity to Maverick, but she didn't acknowledge the other woman at all. "We're going to visit my mother in Chicago," Kendria said, addressing only Maverick. Her professional voice was firmly in place now, the one she'd used when dealing with difficult clients at the law firm where they'd first met 6 years ago. "Our flight board's in 10 minutes, so if you'll excuse us." "They're mine." The words escaped before Maverick could stop them. Not a question, a statement, a realization spoken aloud. "Kendria, they're mine, aren't they?" The terminal seemed to shrink around them. Other passengers continued their journeys, rolling luggage and checking phones, oblivious to the earthquake happening in their midst. But in their small bubble, everything had frozen. Time, sound, the very air itself. Kendria's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Her chin lifted. That stubborn defiance he remembered so well. "This isn't the place for this conversation," she said quietly. "Then where?" The anger was seeping through now, mixing with the shock, creating something volatile. "When were you planning to tell me I have sons? When they graduated college? When they got married? When they had children of their own? When—" "Keep your voice down. Don't tell me to—" "Mr. Ashford," a United Airlines employee appeared, her expression professionally concerned. "Is everything all right here? Is this woman bothering you?" The assumption landed like a slap. Of course, a black woman in a simple dress versus a white billionaire in a custom suit. The employee had made her calculation instantly. "Everything is fine," Kendria said smoothly, before Maverick could respond. "We were just leaving." Maverick noticed several passengers had stopped to watch. Phones were being raised. This was exactly the kind of scene that would end up on social media, dissected and debated by strangers who knew nothing about the truth. The twins had gone quiet, pressed against their mother's sides. Jackson's thumb had found its way into his mouth, a comfort gesture that squeezed Maverick's heart. These boys didn't understand what was happening, only that the adults around them were upset. Kendria tried to move past him, herding her sons toward the gate. Maverick stepped into her path, not aggressively but firmly. "We need to talk." "You're right," she said, meeting his gaze with a fire he remembered well. "We do. But not here, not now, and definitely not like this." Her eyes darted meaningfully toward the boys, then toward Penelope, who stood frozen in a tableau of shock and fury. "You have a honeymoon to get to, Maverick." The word honeymoon landed like cold water dumped over his head. He'd forgotten. For those few minutes, he'd completely forgotten about the private jet, the villa in Bora Bora, the woman he'd married 48 hours ago. Penelope chose that moment to insert herself, linking her arm through Maverick's with possessive force. Her nails dug into his bicep, a warning masked as affection. "Yes, we do," she said, her voice sugary sweet in that way that meant danger. "The jet is waiting, darling. We should go." But Maverick couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the devastating reality that two small human beings who shared. His DNA were about to walk out of his life as suddenly as they'd entered it. "How old are they?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kendria's resolve cracked slightly. Just slightly. Enough for him to see the woman beneath the armor, the woman he'd loved, married, and lost. 4, she said. They turned 4 last month. Last month. While Maverick had been in Tokyo, closing a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while he'd been attending final fittings for his wedding suit, while he'd been choosing wines for the reception and reviewing seating charts, his sons had celebrated a birthday, blown out candles, made wishes, and he hadn't known they existed. 4 years of first steps, first words, first laughs, first tears. 4 years of moments he could never get back. Flight 447 to Chicago, now boarding families. With small children, the announcement echoed through the terminal. "That's us," Kendria said, already moving. "Come on, boys." "Wait." Maverick pulled out his phone, desperate now. "Your number, is it still the same? Can I call you? Can we—" Kendria paused but didn't turn around. Her back was straight, her shoulders set with determination. "Nothing about me is the same, Maverick," she said, her voice carrying a weight of pain and finality that cut him to the bone. "You made sure of that." She walked away. Jalen and Jackson glanced back over their shoulders, curious, confused, before disappearing through the boarding gate. Maverick stood frozen, watching the gate door close behind them. His sons, his ex-wife, his past, gone. Now, let me ask you something. Put yourself in Maverick's shoes for a moment. You've just discovered you have 2 4-year-old sons you never knew existed. Your ex-wife is about to board a plane to Chicago. Your new wife is standing next to you, expecting you to board a private jet to Bora Bora for your honeymoon. What would you do? Would you get on that honeymoon jet and try to forget what you just saw? Would you choose the life you've built, the wife you've married, the future you've planned? Or would you chase the plane to Chicago and risk losing everything? Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to know what you would do, because what Maverick decides next is going to change everything. The private jet sat on the tarmac, engines humming with patient power, waiting for passengers who might never board. Maverick stood motionless at the terminal window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. Beyond the window, he watched the United Airlines plane push back from the gate, watched it taxi toward the runway, watched it carry his sons, into the grey October sky until it was nothing but a silver speck swallowed by clouds. Gone. 4 years of their lives. Gone. And he'd only learned of their existence 15 minutes ago. I cannot believe this is happening. Penelope's voice sliced through his paralysis, sharp as shattered crystal. She stood 3 feet behind him, arms crossed, perfectly manicured nails digging into the sleeves of her designer dress. You're seriously going to let our honeymoon jet sit there while you, what, pine after your ex-wife? Maverick didn't turn around. They're my children, Pen. Children you didn't even know existed until 5 minutes ago. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she moved closer, her voice dropping to an angry hiss. Children she clearly kept from you on purpose for years, and now what you're going. To throw away everything we've built together for a woman who lied to you. Everything we've built together. The phrase echoed in Maverick's mind, hollow and revealing. What exactly had they built? A relationship that photographed well for magazine covers? A strategic alliance between his technology empire and her father's investment firm? A marriage that made their lawyers smile and their accountants nod with approval? He thought about their wedding night, just 48 hours ago. The champagne, the 5-star hotel suite, the way they'd both been so tired from the reception that they'd fallen asleep in separate beds. Too exhausted for intimacy, too polite to acknowledge that neither of them really minded. Was that what marriage was supposed to feel like? He finally turned to face her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since they'd started dating 18 months ago. Penelope Winters was objectively beautiful, the kind of beautiful that came from generations of wealth, the best dermatologists, and a lifetime of knowing exactly which angles worked for photographs. Her makeup was immaculate. Her hair was perfect. Her posture was flawless. But when had he last seen her laugh, really laugh, at something that wasn't for show? When had they last sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence? When had she ever made him feel like he was home? The answer was never, and he'd always known it, somewhere beneath the surface. He'd just been too comfortable in his carefully constructed life to acknowledge the truth. "I need to postpone the honeymoon," he said quietly. Penelope's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot upward. "Postpone? I need to go to Chicago. I need answers." Chicago. She repeated the word like it was an obscenity. "We just had a $2 million wedding, Maverick. 400 guests. It was covered in the Times, in Vogue, in every society column that matters. My mother planned this for 18 months. My father pulled strings to get St. Patrick's Cathedral, and you want to postpone our honeymoon to chase after some woman who... She's not some woman." His voice hardened. "She's the mother of my children. Children she hid from you. Doesn't that tell you everything you need to know about her character? It tells me she was scared. It tells me she felt like she had no choice. It tells me..." Maverick stopped, the realization crystallizing as he spoke. "It tells me I failed her so completely that she thought disappearing was better than asking for my help." Penelope stared at him, genuine shock breaking through her practiced composure. "You're defending her? After what she did? I'm trying to understand." "Well, understand this." Penelope stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you get on a plane to Chicago instead of Bora Bora, we're done. I will not be humiliated like this. I will not be the wife whose husband abandoned her on their honeymoon for his ex and her secret children." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Maverick looked at this woman he'd married, this woman he'd pledged his life to just 2 days ago, this woman who was giving him a choice that shouldn't have been difficult but somehow wasn't difficult at all. "You're right," he said slowly. "You deserve better than this." Hope flickered in Penelope's eyes. "So, you'll stay? You'll get on the jet?" "No." He shook his head. "You deserve someone who can give you their whole heart, someone who doesn't spend every quiet moment thinking about someone else, someone who chose you because they couldn't imagine life without you, not because the merger made sense." He paused, the truth burning his throat. "That was never me, Pen, and I'm sorry. I should never have proposed. We should never have..." The slap came fast and hard, her palm connecting with his cheek with a crack that echoed through the terminal. Maverick's head snapped to the side. He tasted copper. Several travelers stopped to stare, phones already emerging from pockets. "You bastard," Penelope hissed, her composure finally shattering. "You absolute bastard. You're throwing away everything we have, everything we are, for a woman who left you, a woman who lied to you, a woman I never stopped loving." The admission silenced her. Silenced him too, in a way. He hadn't meant to say it. Hadn't meant to acknowledge the truth he'd been burying for 5 years beneath business. Deals and casual relationships and a wedding that was never supposed to happen. But there it was, out in the open, undeniable. He had never stopped loving Kendria Mitchell. Every woman since had been a comparison. Every relationship had been an attempt to fill a void that couldn't be filled. Every moment of success had felt hollow because the person he wanted to share it with was gone. Penelope's expression transformed from shock to cold fury. "My father will destroy you for this, your company, your reputation, everything you've built. He'll burn it all to the ground." Maverick was already pulling out his phone, already searching for flights to Chicago. Let him try to understand what Maverick was about to risk, everything he'd built, everything he'd become. You need to understand, Kendria. You need to understand what they were before the world convinced them they couldn't be. 8 years earlier, Maverick had walked into the offices of Morrison and Associates for a routine contract negotiation. He was 26 years old, already wealthy, already powerful, already accustomed to people treating him like the most important person in any room. Kendria Mitchell didn't give him that treatment. She was the senior counsel assigned to his case, a black woman in her late 20s with natural hair, sharp intelligence, in her eyes, and absolutely zero patience for billionaires who thought their money entitled them to special deference. "Mr. Ashford," she'd said during their first meeting, not looking up from the contract she was reviewing, "if you want to waste my time with unreasonable demands, we can end this meeting now. I have pro bono clients who actually need my help." He'd been so stunned by her directness that he'd laughed. She'd looked up then, one eyebrow raised. "Something funny? No one talks to me like that. Maybe that's your problem." He was fascinated from that moment forward. Kendria Mitchell had grown up on the south side of Chicago. Her mother had worked double shifts as a nurse to keep food on the table. Her father had left when she was 7. Every advantage she had she'd earned, clawing her way through college on scholarships, through law school on determination and caffeine, through the brutal hierarchy of corporate law, through sheer refusal to be ignored. She was brilliant, fierce, uncompromising, and she had absolutely no interest in dating a white billionaire who'd never faced a real obstacle in his life. It took Maverick 6 months to convince her to have dinner with him. 6 months of showing up at the law firm for meetings that could have been handled by email. 6 months of sending thoughtful gifts that proved he was paying attention. A first edition of her favorite author, tickets to see a jazz quartet she'd mentioned in passing, a donation in her name to the Legal Aid Society where she volunteered. "You're persistent," she'd finally said, a hint of a smile breaking through her professional armor. "I'm motivated," he'd corrected. Their first dinner turned into a second turned into a third. Before either of them fully understood what was happening, they were falling in love. And what a love it was. Kendria transformed Maverick's sterile penthouse into something that felt like home. Suddenly, there were plants by the windows, warm throws on the leather couches, the smell of actual cooking replacing the endless parade of takeout containers. She sang Motown classics while preparing Sunday dinner. Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, her voice filling rooms that had always felt too quiet. She challenged him in ways no one else dared. When he complained about a difficult board member, she asked if he'd considered the board member's perspective. When he celebrated a successful acquisition, she asked about the workers who'd lost their jobs in the restructuring. When he took his privilege for granted, she told him stories about her childhood, about food insecurity, about being followed in stores, about teachers who'd assumed she'd amount to nothing. "You see the world from the top of the mountain," she told him once, curled against his chest in bed. "I've spent my life climbing. Neither view is complete. That's why we need each other." Maverick had never felt more understood, more seen, more complete. He proposed after 18 months, a private moment on the beach where her grandmother had taught her to swim as a child. No photographers, no magazine coverage, just the two of them and a ring that had belonged to her grandmother. She'd cried, he'd cried. It was the happiest moment of his life. But happiness, he would learn, was fragile in a world determined to protect its boundaries. The pressure started almost immediately after they announced their engagement. His mother, Victoria Ashford, had smiled through thin lips at the engagement dinner and asked Kendria if she'd considered keeping her natural hair or if she planned to style it more traditionally for the wedding photos. His business partner had pulled him aside at a company event, concerned about optics and shareholder confidence and other phrases that meant the same ugly thing. At country club dinners, well-meaning socialites complimented Kendria on being so articulate and so different from what they expected. They asked where she'd learned to speak so well. They marveled at her table manners as if she'd been raised by wolves. At every event, every dinner, every gala, every corporate function, Kendria was the only black face in a sea of white. Maverick watched her navigate these waters with grace, with dignity, with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. He should have spoken up more, should have shut down the comments, should have made it clear that anyone who disrespected his fiancée was no longer welcome in their lives. But he was comfortable, complacent, convinced that love would be enough to overcome prejudice. It wasn't. They married in a ceremony that balanced both their worlds, her family's warmth against his, family's formality, her friends' genuine joy against his colleagues' polite attendance. For a few hours, Maverick believed they'd made it, believed they'd proven everyone wrong. But the comments didn't stop after the wedding. If anything, they intensified. How long do you think it will last? He overheard his aunt asking his mother at a family brunch. She's obviously after his money, a board member's wife whispered at a charity event, not quite quietly enough. Such an exotic choice, an investor said at a cocktail party, looking at Knewℹ like she was an artifact in a museum. 18 months. 18 months of death by 1,000 cuts. 18 months of watching the woman he loved shrink slightly every time they entered his world. 18 months of failing to protect her the way she deserved. Until the night everything finally broke. The charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was supposed to be a triumph. Maverick's company was being honored for a major donation to the museum's education programs. He and Knewℹ were seated at the head table. She wore a stunning emerald gown that made her glow, and for the first few hours of the evening, everything felt right. They danced. They laughed. They navigated the small talk and the champagne and the endless networking with the ease of a couple who'd learned to move as one. It was nearly midnight when Knewℹ excused herself to use the restroom. Maverick watched her walk away, admiring the graceful way she moved through the crowd, and felt a surge of love so powerful it almost hurt. He didn't see her pause near the corridor, didn't see her freeze at the sound of familiar voices, but he would learn later exactly what she heard. Honestly, I give it another year tops. The voice belonged to Richard Hale, Maverick's oldest business partner, a man who'd attended their wedding and toasted their future. Once the novelty wears off, he'll come to his senses. It's obviously a phase, another voice agreed. A board member's wife Knewℹ had sat next to at countless dinners. A rebellion against family expectations. You know how Victoria feels about the whole situation. The real question is, what happens when they have children? Richard's laugh was cruel. Can you imagine? Victoria would have a stroke. Knewℹ stood frozen in the corridor, hidden by a marble column, listening to people she'd tried so hard to charm discuss her marriage like it was a temporary inconvenience. She didn't cry. Not there. She was too proud for that. Instead, she returned to the table with her head held high. She smiled through the rest of the evening. She said all the right things to all the right people. She played the role of the supportive wife so perfectly that Maverick didn't notice anything was wrong until they were in the car heading home. "Drea? You've barely said a word. Are you okay?" She didn't answer, just stared out the window at the city lights blurring past. It wasn't until they were inside the penthouse, their penthouse, the home she'd worked so hard to make theirs, that she finally broke. The tears came silently at first. She stood in the middle of the living room still wearing that beautiful emerald gown and wept like something inside her had shattered beyond repair. "Knewℹ, what happened? What's wrong? Talk to me. I can't do this anymore." Her voice was thick with pain. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when everyone in your world sees me as your mistake." "What are you talking about? Who said?" "Richard, your business partner. The man who gave a speech at our wedding about eternal love and perfect matches." Her laugh was bitter, broken. "He called me your phase, your rebellion against family expectations. He said once the novelty wears off, you'll come to your senses." Maverick felt rage rising in his chest. "I'll talk to him. I'll make it clear that—" "Make what clear? That I deserve basic respect, that I'm a human being, not an exotic experiment." She shook her head, tears still falling. "Your mother looks at me like I'm something you need to get out of your system. Your colleagues wonder when you'll tire of me. Your entire world has been waiting for our marriage to fail since the day we said I do. That's not true. I love you. You know I love you. I know you love me, Maverick, but love isn't enough. Not when I have to fight for my dignity every time we walk into a room. Not when I'm exhausted from being strong. Not when I spend every day wondering if today is the day you'll realize they were right about us. They're not right. They'll never be right. What about children?" The question stopped him cold. "We've talked about having a family. What happens when we have children, Maverick? What happens when they're not white enough for your world and not black enough for mine? What happens when your mother looks at her own grandchildren and sees reminders of everything she wished you'd left behind? That would never—" "It's already happening." Knewℹ's voice broke on a sob. I won't be anyone's sociology experiment. I won't be a case study in what happens when worlds collide. And I will not raise children in a world where they're seen as your mistake. You could never be a mistake. Our children could never be a mistake. But even as he said the words, Maverick knew he hadn't fought hard enough, hadn't spoken up loudly enough, hadn't protected her the way he'd promised when he'd slid that ring onto her finger. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. Maverick let them sit on his desk for 3 days. Part of him kept hoping she'd call, that they'd talk it through, that he'd find the right words to make her understand that he would change, that he would fight, that he would choose her over everything else. But the call never came. And when his mother visited, when she saw the papers and tried to hide her relief, when she said, "Perhaps it's for the best, you two were from different worlds," something in Maverick broke too. He signed the papers, he let her go, and he would regret it every single day for the next 5 years. What Maverick didn't know, what he wouldn't discover until years later, was that Knewℹ had written him a letter. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, when she discovered she was pregnant, she'd poured her heart onto paper. The letter described her fear and her hope, her heartbreak and her love, her desperate wish that he would fight for them, really fight, in a way he'd never done before. "I wanted to tell you in person," she wrote. "I wanted to see your face when I told you we were going to be parents. I wanted to give you the chance to choose us, to prove everyone wrong. But I'm so afraid, Maverick. Afraid that you'll want to be involved, but not enough. Afraid that our children will grow up feeling like burdens rather than blessings. Afraid that your world will look at them the same way it looked at me." The letter ended with 3 words, "I love you." But Knewℹ never sent it. She would keep it in a drawer for years, a reminder of the road not taken, the words never spoken, the future that might have been. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Knewℹ sat alone in her small apartment, the one she'd rented with her savings after leaving the penthouse, staring at a positive pregnancy test. 2 lines, clear as day, undeniable. She was carrying Maverick Ashford's child. Her first instinct was to call him. She picked up the phone a dozen times over the next week, fingers hovering over his name in her contacts. Each time she imagined a conversation, the shock in his voice, the promises he'd make, the way he'd insist on being involved, on doing the right thing, on making it work. But then she'd remember Richard's voice at the gala, remember the way Victoria looked at her, remember the 1,000 small cuts that had bled her marriage dry. And she'd put the phone back down. Then came the morning she saw the announcement in the New York Times. The photograph showed Maverick at a charity event, a beautiful blonde woman on his arm. Penelope Winters, the caption read, "Daughter of investment mogul Harrison Winters." The accompanying article speculated about a merger between their families, both professional and personal. But it was the quote from Victoria Ashford that broke Knewℹ's heart completely. "We're so pleased Maverick has found someone appropriate," his mother had told the reporter. "Someone who truly belongs in our world." Appropriate, belongs, the words that Knewℹ had never been. At that moment, sitting alone in her small apartment with 2 lives growing, inside her, twins, the doctor would later confirm, Knewℹ made her decision. She would protect her children, not from poverty, not from hardship, but from a world that would see them as problems to be managed rather than miracles to be celebrated. She would shield them from grandparents who might love them grudgingly, from society events where they'd be whispered about, from the soul-crushing awareness that they existed because of a relationship the world had deemed inappropriate. Was it the right decision? She would question herself every single day, but in that moment, it felt like the only choice. She quit her job at Morrison & Associates before they could fire her. They'd already started making her life difficult, her connection to their biggest client now a liability rather than an asset. She moved back to Chicago, back to her mother's brownstone in Bronzeville, back to the community that had raised her. She gave birth to Jalen and Jackson on a warm September night, surrounded by family who loved her unconditionally. She named them for her grandfather and her uncle, strong men who'd never had much money but had given her everything that mattered. And she raised them alone, working 2 jobs, teaching paralegal courses, doing contract work late at night after the boys were asleep. It was exhausting. It was overwhelming. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. But every time she looked at her sons, at their grey eyes and curious minds and beautiful souls, she knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes protection looks like distance. Sometimes the greatest love is the love that lets go. And sometimes the roads we choose lead us back to the crossroads we thought we'd left behind forever. The private investigator Maverick hired was worth every penny of his exorbitant fee. By the time Maverick's flight landed at O'Hare International Airport that Tuesday evening, he had an address, a background report, and enough information to understand just how much Kendria's life had changed in 5 years. She lived in Bronzeville, a historic neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, rich with black history and a community. The investigator's report included details about her current employment status, her mother's residence at the same address, and even the names of the boys' preschool. Maverick sat in the back of the hired car, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. Chicago felt different from New York. The architecture was different. The rhythm was different. Even the air tasted different as the wind came off Lake Michigan, sharp and cold despite it being early October. His phone had been vibrating non-stop since he'd boarded the plane. Penelope, her father, his lawyers, his publicist. The messages ranged from angry to threatening to professionally concerned, about the optics of a billionaire abandoning his bride on their honeymoon. He ignored them all. The car pulled onto a tree-lined street where brownstones stood shoulder to shoulder like old friends. Children played on stoops. Neighbors chatted on porches. Music drifted from open windows. This was a community, the kind where people knew each other's names, looked out for each other's children, and noticed when strangers appeared. "This is the address, sir," the driver said, pulling to a stop in front of a beautifully maintained brownstone with flower boxes in the windows and a small garden in front. Maverick stepped out of the car and immediately felt eyes on him. An elderly woman 2 houses down paused her sweeping to watch. A group of teenagers playing basketball across the street stopped to stare. A white man in an expensive suit climbing out of a luxury car in this neighborhood was noteworthy. He stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the brownstone. Light glowed warm in the windows. He could hear faint music, something soulful, something that sounded like home. Somewhere in that house were his sons, his family, the life he should have had. But standing there, Maverick realized something crucial. This wasn't his world. These weren't his people. This was Kendria's home, built carefully and intentionally without him. He had no right to just barge in and demand a place in it. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature dropped, and Maverick pulled his coat tighter, but still he stood there, frozen by uncertainty and fear in a way that billion-dollar business deals had never made him feel. What if she refused to see him? What if she called the police? What if his presence here caused more harm than good? The front door opened before he could knock. Kendria stood in the doorway, wrapped in a cream cardigan over jeans and a simple t-shirt. Her feet were bare. Her hair was pulled back. She looked tired and beautiful, and absolutely unsurprised to see him. "Mrs. Washington next door called," she said by way of explanation. "She said there was a suspicious white man lurking outside my house. I figured it was you. We need to talk." "Yes," she agreed. "We do. Come in. But keep your voice down. The boys are having dinner with my mother." She stepped aside, and Maverick crossed the threshold into a world that was completely foreign and somehow immediately familiar. The brownstone's interior was everything their New York penthouse had never been. Warm wood floors, slightly scuffed from little feet. Family photographs covering every wall. Kendria's graduation, the twins as newborns. Birthday parties, holidays, ordinary moments made extraordinary by love. Toys were scattered in organized chaos, building blocks in a basket, coloring books on a coffee table, tiny shoes lined up by the door. The smell of cooking filled the air, something rich and comforting that made Maverick's stomach remind him he hadn't eaten since breakfast. This was a home, not a showplace. not an investment property. A home where people lived and laughed and made memories. Drea, who's at the... An older woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She stopped short when she saw Maverick. Gloria Mitchell looked older than Maverick remembered from the 2 brief times they'd met during his marriage to Kendria. Her hair was more grey than black now, pulled back in a neat bun. She wore comfortable clothes, worn jeans and a sweatshirt that said "World's Best Grandma." Her face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from both laughter and struggle. But her eyes, sharp, assessing, protective, were exactly as he remembered. "Well, well," Gloria said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made Maverick instinctively straighten his posture. "Look what the wind blew in." "Mrs. Mitchell," Maverick said. "It's good to see you again." "I'm sure it is." She crossed her arms. "Though I can't say the feeling is mutual." "Mama," Kendria said quietly, "can you keep the boys occupied for a few minutes?" Gloria's eyes narrowed at Maverick. "You got exactly 5 minutes before I come back out here. And if I hear raised voices, I'm coming back with my cast-iron skillet. We clear?" Despite everything, the tension, the fear, the weight of the moment, Maverick almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Gloria disappeared back toward the kitchen, but not before giving Maverick a look that promised consequences if he stepped out of line. Kendria led him to a small study off the main hallway, closing the door behind them. The room was clearly her workspace, a desk covered in legal documents, a laptop, law books on shelves. But what captured Maverick's attention were the walls. Every available surface was covered with the boys' artwork. Finger paintings in wild explosions of color. Crayon drawings of stick figures holding hands. Construction paper cards that said, "I love you, Mama," in wobbly 4-year-old handwriting. Photographs documenting every stage of their young lives. Newborns in the hospital, first birthdays with cake covered, faces, Halloween costumes, Christmas mornings, ordinary Tuesdays that had been extraordinary to someone. 4 years of moments. 4 years of firsts. 4 years of a life he'd never known existed. Maverick stood in front of a photograph of the twins on their 4th birthday. "Just last month," Kendria had said. They wore matching superhero shirts and held balloons, their grey eyes bright with joy. He'd been in Tokyo that day, closing a deal, adding another 100 million to his net worth, while his sons celebrated a birthday he didn't know about. Why? The word came out broken, raw. Maverick turned to face Kendria, who stood by her desk with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something together. "Which why are you asking?" She replied, her voice steady but strained. "Why did I leave? Why did I keep them from you? Why did I let you marry someone else without saying anything?" "All of it." Kendria was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photograph on her desk, the twins as newborns, tiny and perfect, wrapped in blue blankets. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized," she began, her voice taking on the professional tone she used when she needed emotional distance. "Twins. The doctor said twins run in families. Apparently my grandmother was a twin. I didn't even know that." She sat down heavily in her desk chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I was going to tell you. I picked up the phone so many times I lost count. But then I saw the announcement in the Times. You and Penelope Winters at some charity event. Your mother was quoted saying how relieved she was that you'd found someone appropriate." The word landed like a physical blow. "I could have fought for child support," Kendria continued. "Could have demanded recognition. My mother certainly thought I should. But I knew what would happen, Maverick. I'd watched enough custody battles in my career. I knew exactly how it would play out." "How?" Maverick's voice was rough. "How did you think it would play out? Your lawyers would have painted me as a gold digger, a woman who trapped you with a pregnancy to secure her financial future. They would have dug into my background, my finances, my every decision. They would have questioned my fitness as a mother. I would never have. You wouldn't have had a choice." Kendria's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Your family would have insisted, your lawyers would have advised it, and maybe, just maybe, you would have believed them, because it's easier to believe someone trapped you than to admit you failed them." The words hit their mark. Maverick felt each one like an arrow finding the spaces between his ribs. "But it wasn't just about me," Knewℹ said, her voice softening as she looked again at the photograph of her newborn sons. "It was about them. I knew what would happen if I brought them into your world. Your family would have fought for custody, claiming I was unfit. And even if I kept them, they would have grown up feeling like they were a problem to be managed, a scandal to be contained, a mistake that needed explaining. They could never be a mistake. But that's how your world would see them." Knewℹ stood, pacing to the window. Mixed-race children, with a black mother from the South Side and a white billionaire father who'd already divorced her. "Can you honestly tell me your mother would have welcomed them with open arms? That your colleagues wouldn't have whispered about them at company events? That they wouldn't have spent their entire childhood being asked which world they belonged to, as if they couldn't be whole in both?" Maverick wanted to argue, wanted to promise that he would have protected them from all of that. But the truth was lodged in his throat, choking him. "I would have protected them," he said anyway. "Protected you. I would have, like you protected me at the gala." Knewℹ's voice cracked like a whip. "When your business partner called me your phase and you didn't even know about it until I told you. Like you protected me when your mother suggested I should straighten my hair for the wedding photos and you just nodded along. Like you protected me when your board of directors questioned whether you'd lost your mind marrying me and you never said a word." Each question was a perfectly aimed strike, cutting through his defenses, exposing the truth he'd been avoiding for 5 years. He hadn't protected her, not when it mattered, not when it cost him something. "I was weak," Maverick admitted, the words bitter. "I was a coward. But they're my sons, Knewℹ. I had a right to know they existed." "You had a right." She spun to face him, her eyes blazing with an anger he'd never seen before. "What about their right to grow up without being treated like outsiders in their own father's world? What about their right to be seen as whole human beings, not fractions and percentages and diversity quotas? What about their right to a childhood where they didn't have to prove they belonged everywhere they went? That's not fair, isn't it?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "Tell me honestly, Maverick, if you had known about them 5 years ago, what would you have done? Would you have fought your family? Would you have stood up? To your mother, your board, your entire social circle? Would you have chosen us, really chosen us, the way you should have chosen me when we were married?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things they'd never said and all the truths they'd never faced. Because the devastating reality was that Maverick didn't know. The man he'd been 5 years ago, weak, comfortable, unwilling to sacrifice. His privilege for love might have done exactly what Knewℹ feared. Set up a trust fund, scheduled supervised visits, continued his life in his world while keeping his sons at arm's length in theirs. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know what I would have done, but I know what I want to do now." Before Knewℹ could respond, there was a knock at the door. Gloria entered without waiting for permission, her expression troubled. "Knewℹ, baby," she said, "the boys are asking for you, and there's something I need to say to both of you." She closed the door behind her, leaning against it like she needed the support. "This isn't all on Knewℹ," Gloria said, looking directly at Maverick. "When she found out she was pregnant, when she was sitting in my kitchen, crying about whether to tell you, I was the one who told her not to." Knewℹ's head snapped up. "Mama, no, baby, he needs to hear this." Gloria's voice was firm. "I watched my daughter cry herself to sleep for months after you let her walk away. I watched her pack up her life and come home with nothing but heartbreak and a suitcase. I watched her try to be strong while her whole world fell apart. And when she told me she was pregnant with your babies, I told her that you'd already had your chance, that I wasn't about to let you hurt her again or make my grandbabies feel like they were less than enough." She crossed her arms, her gaze never leaving Maverick's face. "So if you're looking for someone to blame, blame me too. I'm the one who said those boys were better off without a father who couldn't protect their mother. I'm the one who said love wasn't enough when it came without courage. And I'm the one who helped her build a life here, in Chicago, where my grandbabies would know they were wanted and loved and perfect exactly as they are. The revelation hung in the air. This wasn't just Kendria's decision. It was a family's decision. A mother protecting her daughter. A grandmother protecting her grandchildren from a world that had already proven itself cruel. "I can't change the past," Maverick said quietly. "I can't undo the ways I failed Kendria. But I can be different now. I can choose differently." "Words are easy," Gloria said, "especially for men with money and power. The question is what you're willing to sacrifice, what you're willing to risk, because those boys in my kitchen, they deserve more than half-hearted attempts and weekend visits. They deserve a father who shows up every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "I know. Do you?" Gloria studied him with the kind of scrutiny only a grandmother protecting her family could muster. "Because the minute you walk into their lives, you can't walk back out. The minute you become their daddy, you are their daddy. Not when it's convenient, not when it fits your schedule, but always. Can you promise that?" Maverick thought about his private jet sitting unused in Bora Bora, about the marriage he'd walked away from that morning, about the company that might be under attack from Penelope's father, about every single thing in his carefully constructed life that was probably falling apart while he stood here. And he realized none of it mattered. Not compared to this. "Yes," he said. "I can promise that." Gloria studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I suppose you should stay for dinner. Can't have a man meeting his sons on an empty stomach." The kitchen was warm and bright and filled with the kind of energy that only small children could generate. Jalen and Jackson sat at a worn wooden table that looked like it had hosted 1,000 family meals. Their legs swung beneath them, not quite reaching the floor. They had plastic plates in front of them, dinosaur plates, Maverick noticed, piled with macaroni and cheese that looked homemade, not from a box. Their cups were shaped like cartoon characters he didn't recognize. Everything was simple, ordinary, perfect. The boys looked up when Maverick entered, and he watched their identical grey eyes widen with recognition. "Mr. Maverick." Jalen, the one with the small scar above his left eyebrow, said excitedly, "You came back." Maverick's throat tightened. "I did. Is that okay?" "Aha." Jackson, slightly smaller with a gentler energy, nodded enthusiastically. "Mama said you're from New York. Did you really live in New York? Did you see the tall buildings? Did you ride the subway?" The questions tumbled out one after another, both boys suddenly animated in the way only 4-year-olds could be. "I lived in New York for a long time," Maverick said, crouching down to their eye level. "And yes, I saw the tall buildings every day." "Did you ever see Spider-Man?" Jalen asked, completely serious. Kendria laughed softly from the doorway. "Baby, Spider-Man isn't real. He's just in movies. But the buildings are real," Jalen insisted with 4-year-old logic. "So, Spider-Man could be real too." "That's very smart thinking," Maverick said, and meant it. "The buildings are definitely real." Jackson had been studying Maverick with quiet intensity while his brother asked questions. Now he slid off his chair and walked over, stopping just a foot away. "Why do you look sad?" he announced with the brutal honesty only children possess. "Jackson, that's not polite," Gloria chided gently, but she was watching Maverick's reaction. "It's okay," Maverick said, his voice thick. "You're right. I am sad. I just found out I missed something very important." "What did you miss?" Jalen asked, abandoning his chair to join his brother. Maverick glanced at Kendria, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Not yet. Not like this. I missed the chance to know 2 very special boys," he said carefully. Jackson reached out and patted Maverick's shoulder with a small, sticky hand. The simple gesture of comfort nearly undid him completely. "It's okay," Jackson said seriously. "Mama says you can always make new friends." The innocent wisdom of his own son's words broke something inside Maverick. He had to close his eyes against the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Your mama is very smart," he managed. "You want to stay for dinner?" Jalen asked. "Grandma made mac and cheese. It's the best in the whole world." "The best in the whole world?" Maverick repeated. "That's a pretty big claim." "It's true," both boys said in unison, and Gloria's stern expression softened into something almost like a smile. "If your mama and grandma say it's okay," Maverick said, looking between the two women who held his entire future in their hands. Kendria hesitated. He could see the war playing out behind her eyes. The instinct to protect her. Sons versus the knowledge that keeping them apart was no longer an option. Sons versus the knowledge that keeping them apart was no longer an option. "Set another plate, Drea," Gloria said, surprising everyone. "Man looks like he hasn't had a proper meal in years." Dinner was chaos and laughter, and everything Maverick's life had been missing. The boys talked over each other, telling stories about their preschool, their teacher Miss Angela, their best friend Marcus who could do a cartwheel, and Jackson is allergic to dogs, Jalen explained seriously, so we can't get a puppy even though we really, really want one. "I get hives," Jackson added. "They're itchy, but cats are okay." Grandma said maybe we can get a cat. "Maybe," Gloria emphasized. "When you boys are old enough to help take care of it." Maverick watched them come alive, these brilliant, articulate, kind children their mother had raised without him. They said, "Please and thank you" without prompting. They helped clear their plates when they were done. They asked if Mr. Maverick needed more water when they noticed his glass was empty. Everything they were, everything good and bright and wonderful about them, came from Kendria and Gloria. From this home, from this life built carefully in his absence. "Mr. Maverick," Jalen said suddenly, leaning across the table with his face very serious. "You have eyes like me and Jackie." The kitchen went silent. Even at 4 years old, the boys had noticed what genetics couldn't hide. "Lots of people have grey eyes," Kendria said quickly, but her voice carried a tremor. "But his are the same," Jackson insisted, looking back and forth between Maverick and his brother. "Look, Mama, they're the same color. Like mine and Jalen's." Gloria stood abruptly. "Who wants ice cream?" The distraction worked like magic. Both boys forgot about eye colors in favor of chocolate sauce and sprinkles. But the moment had shifted something fundamental. The truth was pressing against the edges of their carefully constructed evening, demanding acknowledgement. Maverick caught Kendria's eye across the table. "Tomorrow," he mouthed. She nodded, relief and fear warring on her face. Tomorrow they would tell them. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for these few precious hours, Maverick got to simply be in the presence of his sons, got to hear their laughter, got to watch them be exactly who they were meant to be, and it was more than enough. The boys had been in bed for an hour when the screech of tires shattered the quiet evening. Maverick and Kendria sat on the front steps of the brownstone, the Chicago night wrapping around them. They'd been talking in careful circles around everything that mattered, the past, the present, the impossible future. Gloria had grudgingly allowed Maverick to help with bedtime, and he'd read them a story about dragons. And nights, their small bodies pressed against his sides until they'd drifted off to sleep. The feeling of his sons sleeping against him would stay with Maverick forever. But now, a limousine, black and gleaming and completely out of place. In this neighborhood, pulled up to the curb with aggressive purpose. Penelope emerged like an avenging angel. She wore all black, designer black, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes blazed with fury that no amount of polish could disguise. "I should have known," she spat, her heels clicking sharply as she stalked toward them. "You couldn't even wait one day before running back to your baby mama." The term landed like a slur, intended as one. Maverick stood, positioning himself between Penelope and the front steps where Kendria sat. "Penelope, this isn't what?" Her laugh was ugly, sharp. "Isn't you choosing her over me? Isn't you abandoning your wife for the woman who kept your children from you? Tell me, Maverick, what exactly is this?" "This is me trying to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Penelope's voice rose. "The right thing would have been getting on our honeymoon jet like we planned. The right thing would have been honoring your commitment to me. The right thing would have been—" "Stop." Maverick's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Choose your next words very carefully, Penelope. You're standing in front of the mother of my children's home. Whatever anger you have for me, whatever pain you feel, you will not disrespect her." Penelope's eyes widened, shocked by his tone. In 18 months of dating and 48 hours of marriage, he'd never spoken to her that way. "You're defending her." She turned her fury on Knewℹ, who had stood but remained silent. "After what she did, after she stole years from you, she's a liar, a manipulator. Penelope." Knewℹ's voice cut through the tirade, calm and controlled. "You're right. I did keep his children from him. It was my decision, and I own it. But this isn't about you and me. This is about 2 little boys sleeping upstairs who deserve better than adults screaming on their front lawn." The reminder of the children seemed to deflate some of Penelope's rage, but not all of it. "Do you know what you've done?" She turned back to Maverick. The headlines are already vicious. "Tech billionaire abandons bride on honeymoon. Maverick Ashford's secret family." My father has been on the phone all day with board members, investors, journalists. He's calling in every favor. He's going to destroy you. Let him try. You keep saying that. Penelope's composure finally cracked completely. "You keep acting like you don't care what this costs you. Your reputation, your company, your place in society, everything we built together." "We didn't build anything," Maverick said, not unkindly. "We performed, we networked, we looked good in photographs. But we never built a life, Penelope, not a real one." Tears welled in her eyes. Real ones, he thought. Perhaps the first real emotion she'd shown since the airport. "I thought you loved me," she whispered. "I tried to," he admitted. "But you deserve someone who doesn't have to try. Someone who chooses you first, always, without question." "That was never me." Penelope stood there for a moment, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Then she straightened, pulling her armor back into place. "The divorce will be ugly," she said. "The prenup won't save you from everything. I know. My father really will come after your company. I know. And you're still choosing this? Choosing them?" Maverick looked back at the brownstone, at the warm light in the windows, at Knewℹ standing on the steps of her home, at the life his sons were living inside those walls. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm choosing them." Penelope nodded once, sharp and final. She walked back to her limousine with her head held high, and Maverick watched her drive away, watched his marriage of 48 hours end as quickly and meaninglessly as it had begun. When the taillights disappeared around the corner, Knewℹ finally spoke. "That was your wife." "That was a mistake," Maverick corrected. "You were my wife. She was just a person I married." Knewℹ looked at him for a long moment, something complicated moving through her expression. "Don't put that on me, Maverick. Your failed marriage isn't my responsibility." "No," he agreed. "It's mine. All of it is mine to own." They stood in silence, the Chicago wind picking up, carrying the smell of approaching rain. "Tomorrow," Knewℹ said. "We tell them tomorrow. Together." She nodded slowly. "Together. Before we continue with the next part of this story, I need to know something from you. This is a story about second chances, about redemption, about fighting for what matters, even when the cost is high. If you're invested in finding out what happens when Maverick and Knewℹ tell those boys the truth, if you want to know whether this family can be healed, if you're rooting for love to win against impossible odds, then do me a favor right now. Smash that like button. Hit subscribe. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances, because what happens next is going to change everything for this family, and you won't want to miss a single moment. The attack came exactly 72 hours after Maverick chose Chicago over Bora Bora. He was sitting in Knewℹ's kitchen on Friday morning, 3 days after the airport encounter, drinking coffee while the boys ate breakfast. He'd told them the truth on Wednesday, just as promised. The conversation had been gentler than expected, with Jackson asking if this meant Mr. Maverick would stay forever, and Jalen wanting to know if they could call him Daddy now. Maverick had cried. So had Knewℹ. Even Gloria had wiped away tears when both boys climbed into his lap and hugged him tight. But that moment of peace was about to be shattered. His phone erupted with notifications, emails, text messages, calls from his CFO, his legal team, his publicist, all of them urgent, all of them desperate. "What's wrong?" Kendria asked, seeing his expression change. Maverick opened the first email and felt his stomach drop. Harrison Winters had declared war. The Wall Street Journal headline read, "Tech billionaire Maverick Ashford abandons bride on honeymoon for secret family." But that was just the beginning. Bloomberg reported, Ashford Technologies' stock plummets as CEO's personal life raises questions about leadership stability. Forbes posted, "Inside Maverick Ashford's double life, the secret children he never acknowledged." Every major business publication had picked up the story, and the narrative being pushed was brutal, calculated, and designed for maximum damage. The articles painted him as unstable, unreliable, a man whose personal chaos indicated professional incompetence. Anonymous sources, clearly board members who'd been pressured by Harrison, questioned his judgment, his fitness to lead, his ability to maintain investor confidence. But the worst part wasn't the media coverage. It was the notification from his CFO, emergency board meeting called. "They're moving for a vote of no confidence. Harrison has been buying up shares through shell companies. He's got enough votes to remove you as CEO." Maverick read the message 3 times, his coffee going cold in his hand. Harrison Winters wasn't just coming after his reputation. He was coming after his company. The technology empire Maverick had built from nothing. The business that bore his name, the work that had defined his entire adult life. "Maverick?" Kendria's voice cut through his shock. "Talk to me." He showed her the phone, watched her read through the headlines, the emails, the threat. "You need to go back to New York," she said immediately. "You need to fight this." "I know." But even as he said it, Maverick was thinking about the boys upstairs getting dressed for preschool, about the promise he'd made to read them bedtime stories tonight, about the pediatrician appointment next week that he'd offered to attend. His CFO called. Maverick answered on speaker. "Mav, it's bad," Richard Chen said, his voice tight with stress. "Harrison has been planning this since the moment you got off that plane to Chicago. He's got proxies lined up. He's pressured 3 board members into switching their votes. If we don't counter this now, if you don't fly back and start doing damage control, you're going to lose the company. How long do I have? The vote is Monday, 72 hours. You need to be on a plane today. You need to start calling board members, investors, anyone with influence. You need to do interviews, control the narrative, show strength." Maverick looked at Kendria, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "And if I don't?" he asked quietly. Silence on the other end of the line. Then Harrison Winters takes control of Ashford Technologies. "Everything you've built, everything you are, gone, everything you are." The words echoed in Maverick's mind. For so long, his identity had been wrapped up in his company. Billionaire, CEO, tech genius. Those titles had defined him, shaped him, given his life meaning when everything else felt empty. But sitting in this warm kitchen, in a modest brownstone in Bronzeville, with the sound of his son's laughter drifting down from upstairs, he realized something fundamental. His company wasn't everything he was. It wasn't even close. "Richard," Maverick said slowly, "how long would it take me to rebuild if I lost the company entirely?" Another stunned silence. "What?" "If Harrison takes Ashford Technologies, if I lose everything, how long before I could build something new?" Mav, you can't be serious. This is your life's work. How long?" Richard sighed. "With your knowledge, your connections, your reputation, even with this scandal, 5 years maybe. You'd have to start smaller, rebuild trust, but yeah, 5 years. And my son's childhood?" Maverick looked at Kendria. "If I miss the next 5 years of their lives, can I rebuild that?" "Maverick!" Richard's voice was almost pleading now. "Don't do this. Don't throw away everything for my family," Maverick finished. "I'm throwing it away for my family." He ended the call. The kitchen was silent except for the tick of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of the boys playing upstairs. "You can't do this," Kendria said, but her voice was shaking. That company is everything you've worked for. No, Maverick corrected gently. That company is everything I worked for when I didn't know what actually mattered. Now I do, but... Kendria, I missed 4 years of their lives. 4 years of first words and first steps and first everything. I will not miss another day by choice. Let Harrison take the company. I'll rebuild. I'll start over. But I won't rebuild these boys' childhood. That's the one thing money can't buy back. He watched the realization dawn in her eyes. Watched her understand that he was serious. That he was choosing them, truly choosing them, over everything else. This was the test she'd never asked him to take. The proof she'd never demanded. And he was passing it. You're really staying? She whispered. I'm really staying. Kendria stood abruptly, walked to the sink, gripped the edge like she needed something solid to hold on to. Her shoulders shook slightly, and Maverick realized she was crying. He went to her, turned her gently to face him. I failed you once, he said quietly. I chose my comfort over your dignity. I chose other people's approval over your happiness. I let you walk away because fighting for you meant sacrificing things I wasn't ready to sacrifice. But that man is dead, Drea. I killed him the moment I saw our sons at that airport. And this man, the man I'm becoming, will choose you and them every single time, no matter what it costs. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time since the airport, she let herself really see him. Not as the man who'd failed her, not as the billionaire who'd let her go, but as the father of her children who was finally becoming the man she'd needed him to be. Daddy, Daddy. Jalen and Jackson came thundering down the stairs, still in their pajamas despite Gloria's attempts to get them dressed. Can you take us to school today? Jackson asked, attaching himself to Maverick's leg. Mama always takes us, but we want you to come too. Maverick looked down at his sons, then back at Kendria, then at his phone where dozens of urgent messages were still flooding in. Yeah, buddy, he said, scooping Jackson up while Jalen climbed him like a tree. I'll take you to school, today and every day you want me to. And just like that, the choice was made. Harrison Winters could have the company. Maverick had found something infinitely more valuable. The private investigator's report arrived at Kendria's door 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon when she was home alone. Gloria had taken the boys to the park. Maverick was at a coffee shop downtown, working on plans for a new, smaller tech startup. Something he could build while staying in Chicago, while being present for his family. Kendria signed for the thick manila envelope, confused. She wasn't expecting anything. Her confusion turned to cold fury when she opened it and started reading. Subject: Kendria Michelle Mitchell, compiled by Sterling Investigations LLC, commissioned by Victoria Ashford. The report was thorough, invasive, cruel. It documented Kendria's financial struggles in excruciating detail. Her 2 jobs, her student loan debt, the times she'd been late on rent before moving in with Gloria. Every penny she'd borrowed, every bill she'd juggled, every month she'd chosen between new shoes for the boys or fixing her car. It included photographs of her small bedroom in Gloria's brownstone, of the boys sharing a room, of the modest toys, the second-hand clothes, the lived-in furniture that had seen better days. It painted a picture of instability, struggle, a woman barely keeping her head above water, working herself to exhaustion, raising children in less than ideal circumstances. The conclusion was clear: Kendria Mitchell was an unfit mother, and Victoria Ashford was building a case for custody. Kendria's hands shook as she read through page after page of her life dissected and weaponized. Every choice she'd made to protect her children was being twisted into evidence against her. Every sacrifice was being used as proof of her inadequacy. She was still sitting at the kitchen table, the report spread in front of her, when Maverick came home an hour later. Drea? What's wrong? He saw her face and immediately crossed to her side. Then he saw the report. His expression went from concern to confusion to volcanic rage in the space of 3 seconds. When did this arrive? An hour ago. Her voice was hollow. Your mother is trying to take my sons. Maverick grabbed the report, flipped through it, his jaw clenching tighter with every page. She can't do this, he said. But they both knew she could try. Money bought the best lawyers. Influence swayed judges, and a billionaire's mother claiming concern for her grandchildren would be taken seriously, no matter how baseless the claims. "I need to call her," Maverick said, already pulling out his phone. "Wait." But he was already dialing. Victoria Ashford answered on the second ring, her cultured voice dripping with false warmth. "Maverick, darling, have you finally come to your senses? What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was deadly quiet. "I'm protecting my grandchildren," Victoria replied smoothly. "Those boys deserve better than being raised in poverty by a woman working herself to death. They deserve their mother." Maverick cut her off. "The woman who has loved them, protected them, raised them to be extraordinary despite having no help from anyone. Least of all from me. They're Ashfords, Maverick. They belong in our world. Those boys are Mitchells and Ashfords. They belong in both worlds. And they belong with their mother, a mother who kept them from you." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "Who lied by omission, who denied you the right to know your own children. And you're defending her? She protected them from you," Maverick said. "From people who would see them as less than. From a world that would question their worth based on the color of their skin. She protected them from the same people who made their mother feel like she wasn't good enough. And she was right to do it. How dare you?" "No, Mother. How dare you?" Maverick's voice rose. "Those boys are your grandsons, your blood, and you're trying to take them away from the woman who has been their entire world, because what? She's not wealthy enough? Not white enough? Not appropriate enough for the Ashford name? This isn't about race. It's always been about race." Maverick was shouting now, and Kendria had never heard him like this. Unleashed, furious, fighting. Every comment you made about Kendria straightening her hair. Every time you called her exotic or different, or said I'd found someone more appropriate when I married Penelope. It's always been about the fact that you couldn't accept that I loved a black woman, and now you want to take her children because you're still trying to erase her from my life. Silence on the other end of the line. Then Victoria's voice, cold as ice. "If you choose her over your family—" "She is my family," Maverick interrupted. "She and those boys are my family. You're just the woman who gave birth to me. And if you pursue this custody case, if you try to take my sons from their mother, you will never see them again. Not for holidays, not for birthdays, not ever. Maverick, I mean it, Mother. Drop this, destroy that report, fire the investigators, or I disappear from your life completely. Your choice." He ended the call before she could respond. The kitchen was silent, except for his ragged breathing. He stood there, phone still clutched in his hand, shaking with adrenaline and fury. Kendria stood, moved to him, took his face in her hands. "You just cut ties with your parents," she said softly. "They stopped being my parents when they tried to hurt my children's mother." "Maverick, family isn't blood, Drea. It's not DNA or last names or trust funds. It's the people who show up. The people who choose you. The people who love you exactly as you are." He covered her hands with his. "Gloria has been more of a parent to me in 2 weeks than my mother has been in 34 years. Because she loves you and the boys without conditions, without requirements. That's family." A single tear rolled down Kendria's cheek. "She won't stop. Your mother, she'll be angry. She might still—" "Let her try," Maverick said. "I've got the best family law attorney in Chicago on speed dial now. Thanks to you, I know how to fight for what matters, and I will burn every bridge I need to burn to keep our boys safe. Our boys." The possessive pronoun hung between them, warm and solid and real. Maverick first met Derek Thompson on a Saturday morning at the park. 3 weeks had passed since the airport encounter. 3 weeks of Maverick learning the rhythms of his sons' lives, bedtime routines, favorite foods, the specific way Jackson needed his blanket folded to fall asleep. 3 weeks of slowly, carefully rebuilding trust with Kendria while trying not to push too hard, too fast. He'd moved into a small apartment 15 minutes from the brownstone. Nothing fancy. Nothing that screamed billionaire. Just a modest 2-bedroom where the boys could have their own space when they stayed over. This particular Saturday, he'd taken Jalen and Jackson to the playground while Kendria caught up on work. The boys were on the swings, demanding to be pushed higher, Daddy, higher, when a man approached. Tall, well-dressed in casual clothes that somehow looked both comfortable and expensive. Black, handsome in a way that made Maverick instinctively dislike him. Jalen Jackson. The man called out, and both boys immediately lit up. "Mr. Derek," they shouted in unison, abandoning the swings to run to him. Maverick watched this stranger hug his sons, watched them chatter excitedly about their week, watched the easy familiarity between them, and felt something ugly twist in his chest. Jealousy, pure and simple. The man looked up, saw Maverick, and approached with an outstretched hand and a warm smile. "You must be Maverick," he said. "Derek Thompson. I've heard a lot about you." Maverick shook his hand, noted the firm grip, the confident posture, the expensive watch. "I wish I could say the same." Derek's smile didn't falter. "I'm a friend of Kendria's. I've known the boys since they were 2. A friend." The way he said it carried weight, history, meaning. "Derek's a lawyer," Jackson explained, returning to attach himself to Maverick's leg. "He helped Mama when her car broke down. And he brings us books, and takes us for ice cream," Jalen added. "The good kind with the waffle cones." Derek chuckled. "Guilty. Though I should probably clear those ice cream trips with you now, given—" He gestured vaguely at Maverick, at the boys, at the new family dynamic. They talked for a few more minutes, careful, polite conversation that revealed Derek was a partner at one of Chicago's top corporate law firms, that he'd been pursuing Kendria for nearly 2 years, that he'd been there for late-night emergency calls when Jackson had croup for the boy's 3rd birthday, party when Kendria had been overwhelmed, for countless ordinary moments that should have been Maverick's. After Derek left, with promises to the boys that he'd see them soon, Maverick stood there feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. This man had been there, had shown up, had earned a place in his sons' lives through consistency and care, while Maverick had been living in oblivion in New York. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Maverick brought it up to Kendria. "Tell me about Derek." Kendria looked up from the dishes she was washing, her expression carefully neutral. "He's a friend. The boys love him. He's been good to them, good to me." Maverick leaned against the counter, forcing himself to ask the question that was eating him alive. Are you two?" "No," Kendria said firmly. "Derek has made his interest clear. He's asked me out at least a dozen times, but I've never said yes." "Why not?" She turned to face him, her eyes steady. "Because I wasn't ready. Because the boys needed stability, not a revolving door of men. Because—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because Derek is a good man who showed up when you didn't, and he deserves someone who can give him their whole heart. That was never me." The echo of Maverick's own words to Penelope wasn't lost on him. "But he's still here," Maverick said quietly. "Still showing up." "Yes. Because that's who Derek is. Patient, kind, steady." Kendria dried her hands, met his gaze. "Everything you weren't, when I needed you to be." The words stung, but they were true. "I can't compete with that," Maverick admitted. "I can't compete with someone who was there for all the moments I missed." "No," Kendria agreed. "You can't, but you can be here for the moments that matter now. You can earn your place in their lives, in our lives, not by demanding it or buying it, but by showing up every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "I will," Maverick promised. "But Dryer, I need to know, is there a chance for us, or am I too late?" She was quiet for a long time, looking at him with those beautiful eyes that had haunted him for 5 years. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Ask me again in 6 months, after you've proven that this isn't a phase, that you're not going to wake up one day and regret choosing Chicago over your empire, that you can be the father our sons need and the partner I needed you to be before." 6 months. It felt like forever. It felt like no time at all. "I can do that," Maverick said, and he meant it. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, 5 weeks after Maverick had become a father. He was in a meeting with potential investors for his new startup, something small, manageable, based in Chicago, when his phone rang with the school's number. "Mr. Ashford, this is Bright Horizons Preschool. Jackson has had a severe allergic reaction. We've called an ambulance. Can you come immediately?" Maverick was out the door before the receptionist finished speaking. He'd insisted on being added as an emergency contact 2 weeks ago, after attending his first parent-to-teacher conference. Knewℹ had hesitated, but ultimately agreed. Now he was grateful beyond words. The ambulance was already at the hospital when Maverick arrived, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. He found Jackson in the emergency room, his small face swollen, hives, covering his arms and chest, an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. Jalen stood beside the bed, holding his brother's hand, tears streaming down his face. "Daddy." Jalen ran to him, and Maverick scooped him up while moving to Jackson's bedside. "Hey, buddy," Maverick said, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his throat. "You're okay. The doctors are taking good care of you." Jackson's grey eyes, so much like Maverick's own, were wide with fear behind the oxygen mask. Maverick took his free hand, the one not being monitored by machines, and squeezed gently. "I'm right here, Jackson. I'm not going anywhere." A doctor appeared, explaining that Jackson had been exposed to peanuts. His parent had sent peanut butter cookies for a birthday celebration. The reaction was severe but manageable. The epinephrine was working. He would be fine, but they'd need to keep him for observation. Maverick listened, asked questions, made decisions, all while keeping his voice calm and his hands steady in his son's small grip. For Jalen's sake, for Jackson's sake, for the sake of the man he was trying to become. Inside, he was falling apart. Knewℹ burst through the emergency room doors 40 minutes later, her face pale, her eyes wild. "Where is he? Where's my baby?" "Here," Maverick said. "He's okay. The reaction is under control." Knewℹ rushed to Jackson's bedside, took in the monitors and the oxygen mask and the hives, and let out a sob. "What happened?" "Peanut exposure at school." "But he's stable," the doctor said. Knewℹ turned to him, and in her eyes, he saw the war between gratitude that he'd been there and fury at the universe for putting her child in danger. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came. You handled everything. That's what fathers do." Something shifted in her expression. Some wall she'd been maintaining cracked just slightly. The doctor returned with paperwork and discharge instructions. Jackson would need to stay overnight for observation, but he was out of danger. One parent could stay with him. "I'll stay," Knewℹ said immediately. "We'll both stay," Maverick corrected. "Jalen can stay with Gloria, but I'm not leaving my son." Hours later, after Jalen had been picked up by Gloria, after Jackson had fallen asleep in his hospital bed, Maverick stood in the hallway outside the room and finally let himself break. The fear he'd held back, the terror of almost losing his son before he'd even had the chance to know him, the weight of 5 years of missed moments, and the devastating reminder that time was finite, precious, irreplaceable. Knewℹ found him there, shoulders shaking, silent tears streaming down his face. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining in the quiet hospital corridor. "I almost lost him," Maverick whispered. "Before I even had him." "But you didn't," Knewℹ said softly. "You were here. You showed up. You were exactly the father he needed. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was trust beginning to form in the spaces between them. And for now, that was enough. 6 weeks after the airport, 6 weeks of proving himself, showing up, being present. Knewℹ had asked for Maverick's help organizing her home office on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The boys were with Derek, a test of sorts, Maverick suspected, to see if he could handle another man being part of their lives without letting jealousy consume him. He was trying. God, he was trying. They were sorting through old files when Maverick found it, tucked between tax documents from 5 years ago. An envelope, addressed to him in Knewℹ's handwriting. The paper was slightly yellowed, like it had been handled many times over the years. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up. Knewℹ turned, saw what he was holding, and went completely still. You shouldn't. She reached for it, but Maverick had already noticed the date in the corner. 5 years ago. 2 weeks after their divorce was finalized. Can I read it? He asked quietly. Kendria stood frozen for a long moment, then nodded once. If you want to. Maverick carefully opened the envelope, pulled out the letter, and began to read. Maverick, I'm writing this letter knowing I'll probably never send it, but I need to say these things, even if only to paper, even if only to myself. I'm pregnant. Twins, the doctor said. 2 little lives growing inside me, half you and half me. Perfect combinations of our 2 worlds. The news should fill me with joy. Instead, I'm terrified. I wanted to tell you in person. Wanted to see your face when I said the words. Wanted to give you the chance to choose us, to prove everyone wrong, to show me that love really can overcome everything. But I'm so afraid, Maverick. Afraid that you'll want to be involved but not enough. That you'll set up trust funds and schedule visits and keep us at arm's length, like a responsibility you can manage rather than a family you belong to. Afraid that our children will grow up feeling like they're not quite enough for your world. That they'll spend their lives trying to be whiter, quieter, more appropriate for the Ashfords. Afraid that they'll face the same 1,000 cuts I faced, the compliments that were insults, the questions about where they really belong, the feeling of being constantly examined, judged, found wanting. I won't do that to them. I won't bring them into a world that will see them as mistakes to be managed rather than miracles to be celebrated. So, I'm keeping this secret. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you would surprise me. Maybe you would fight for us in ways you never did when we were married. But I can't risk it. Not with them. Not when the stakes are their entire sense of self-worth. I hope you find happiness, Maverick. I hope you build the life you're meant to have. I hope you find someone your family approves of. Someone who fits seamlessly into your world. And I'll build a life here, with these 2 miracles you'll never know. I wanted to tell you. I wanted you to choose us. But I was so afraid you wouldn't. I love you. I always will. Kendria. Maverick read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words by the end. She had wanted to tell him, had written it all down, had poured out her heart, had given him a chance, even if only on paper. This wasn't cold calculation. This wasn't revenge. This was fear and love and heartbreak all mixed together, written by a woman who'd been hurt so badly she couldn't trust that he'd choose differently when it mattered most. And the devastating truth was, she'd been right to be afraid. The man he'd been 5 years ago would have failed that test. Would have set up the trust funds, scheduled the visits, kept his sons at a comfortable distance while living his appropriate life with his appropriate wife. He looked up at Kendria, who was watching him with tears streaming down her face. I would have failed you, he said hoarsely. If you'd sent this letter, if you'd told me, I would have failed you and them, just like you feared. I know, she whispered, but I won't fail you now. He stood, crossed to her, the letter still clutched in his hand. This man, the man you wrote to, he's gone. And I know you don't fully trust that yet. I know I have to prove it every single day. But Drea, I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making sure our sons never feel like they're anything less than perfect exactly as they are. Kendria looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, the beginning of belief. Let me ask you something. Put yourself in Kendria's position for a moment. If someone had hurt you deeply, broken your trust, failed you when you needed them most, but then came back years later, having changed, having grown, having become the person they should have been all along. Would you give them a second chance? Would you risk your heart again? Would you let them back into your life, knowing they could hurt you just as badly? What would you have done if you'd received that letter 5 years ago? Would you have fought for that family, or would comfort and approval have won? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Because the choices we make in moments of fear define the lives we end up living. And Maverick is about to learn whether his choices have earned him the life he wants. 8 weeks after the airport encounter, Maverick stood in an empty warehouse in the heart of Bronzeville, watching Knewℹ pace the concrete floor with her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, the electrical needs to be upgraded for the computer labs, she was saying, her voice carrying that authoritative tone he'd always loved. No, we're not cutting corners on safety. I don't care if it costs more. These kids deserve a space that's built right. She ended the call and turned to find Maverick watching her with a smile. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. You, he said simply. You're extraordinary. The warehouse was his redemption project, a technology education center that would provide free coding classes, college prep tutoring, and career training for neighborhood kids. He'd funded it entirely, but Knewℹ was bringing it to life. As the center's executive director, she'd spent the past 6 weeks transforming his blank check into something meaningful. She'd hired local contractors, recruited volunteer teachers, designed a curriculum that would actually serve the community's needs rather than impose some outsider's vision of what they should want. She'd turned his money into purpose. You're different, Knewℹ said, crossing to where he stood reviewing the architect's plans spread across a makeshift table. The Maverick I knew would have thrown money at this and hired someone else to handle the details. The Maverick you knew was an idiot, he replied without hesitation. She laughed, that real unguarded laugh that still had the power to stop his heart. He wasn't all bad, she said softly. I did love him, you know. Despite everything, the past tense stung, but he absorbed it. I know. I loved you too. I just loved my comfort zone more. And now? He looked at her across the table, this woman who'd raised his children alone, who'd protected them even. From him when necessary, who was now giving him a chance to be part of building something that mattered. Now I know that comfort zones are where dreams go to die, he said. My real life, the life I want, it's messy and complicated, and requires me to be uncomfortable every single day. But it's real. Knewℹ held his gaze for a long moment. Something was shifting between them, had been shifting for weeks now. The professional distance she'd maintained was cracking, revealing glimpses of the woman who'd once loved him enough to risk everything. The boys asked me last night if you were going to stay in Chicago forever, she said quietly. What did you tell them? That I didn't know. That some things take time to figure out. Maverick set down the plans and moved around the table. I bought a house, he said. Not an apartment, a house. 4 bedrooms, backyard, good school district. 15 minutes from the brownstone. Knewℹ's eyes widened slightly. Maverick, I'm not going anywhere, Drea. This isn't a phase. This isn't me playing house until I get bored and return to New York. This is my life now. Here. With them. And if you'll let me, with you. She opened her mouth to respond, but her phone rang again, the contractor with another question. She took the call, but her eyes never left his face. And in those eyes, he saw possibility. 3 weeks later, the center held a soft opening for neighborhood families. Children ran through the bright, newly painted computer labs. Parents asked questions about enrollment. Local teachers volunteered to help with the after-school programs. Maverick stood back and watched Knewℹ in her element, confident, passionate, making every person who walked through the door feel seen and valued. This was success, not the billions in his bank account, not the empire with his name on it. This, lives touched, futures changed, a community strengthened. This was what actually mattered. And the woman making it happen was still the only woman he'd ever truly loved. 2 months earlier, the Wednesday morning after the airport encounter, the conversation Maverick had been both dreading and desperately wanting finally arrived on a grey Wednesday morning. He'd spent the night at a hotel, giving Knewℹ space to think, to process, to decide whether she was really going to let him into their lives. When she'd called that morning asking him to come over, his hands had shaken so badly he could barely hold his phone. Now he sat in Knewℹ's living room, Gloria watching from the kitchen doorway like a protective sentinel, while Knewℹ brought the boys down from their bedroom. Jalen and Jackson bounded into the room in their pajamas. Dinosaurs on Jackson's, superheroes on Jalen's. There, faces bright with the uncomplicated joy of 4-year-olds who didn't yet know how heavy the world could be. Mr. Maverick, they chorused, and Jalen immediately climbed into his lap while Jackson settled beside him on the couch. The casual affection nearly broke him. These boys who barely knew him, offering trust so easily, had no idea what their gesture meant. Kendria sat in the chair across from them, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Boys, Mr. Maverick and I need to talk to you about something important." Both boys immediately went still, sensing the serious tone. "Are you in trouble?" Jackson asked Kendria, his emotionally intuitive nature picking up on her stress. "No, baby. Nobody's in trouble." She took a breath. "But you know how you've asked about your daddy?" Two identical heads nodded solemnly. This was clearly familiar territory for them, questions they'd asked many times, getting careful answers from their mother. "Well, sometimes families are complicated," Kendria continued, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Sometimes mamas and daddies aren't together, but that doesn't mean the love isn't there." "Like Marcus?" Jalen asked, referencing their friend from preschool. "His daddy doesn't live with him, but he still comes to soccer." "Exactly like that," Kendria said, relief flickering across her face at the familiar reference point. "Your daddy. He didn't know about you for a long time. That was my decision. I should have told him, but I was scared, and I made a choice that I thought was right. But he knows now," Jackson asked with 4-year-old practicality. "He knows now," Kendria confirmed, then looked directly at Maverick. "And he came to find you the very same day he learned you existed." The boys followed her gaze, and Maverick watched understanding dawn in those intelligent grey eyes, his eyes, reflected back at him in miniature. "Mr. Maverick is our daddy," Jalen whispered, his small hand gripping Maverick's shirt. "Yes, buddy," Maverick said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your dad." The silence that followed felt eternal. Maverick's heart hammered against his ribs. What if they rejected him? What if they were angry? What if... Jackson slid off the couch with the solemnity of a judge about to deliver a verdict. He walked over to stand directly in front of Maverick, looking up at him with those searching eyes. "You didn't know about us?" he asked. "I didn't," Maverick confirmed, his throat tight. "But the moment I found out, I came to find you, and I'm not going anywhere now. Promise?" Jackson held out his pinky finger. Maverick linked his much larger pinky with his son's tiny one. "I promise." That simple gesture seemed to be all the reassurance Jackson needed. He launched himself into Maverick's arms, quickly followed by Jalen, both boys clinging to him with the absolute trust that only children could offer. Maverick held them. These pieces of his heart he hadn't known were missing, and couldn't stop the tears that streamed down his face. Kendria was crying too, her hand pressed over her mouth. Even Gloria had turned away, wiping at her eyes. "Does this mean you're going to live with us?" Jalen asked, his voice muffled against Maverick's shoulder. "Not right away," Maverick said carefully, glancing at Kendria. "Your mama and I have some things to figure out, but I'll be around a lot, and you can call me whenever you want, and I'll come to your school and your games and—" "Can we call you Daddy now?" Jackson interrupted. Instead of Mr. Maverick. The question shattered something inside him. "You can call me Daddy. I would love that." "Daddy," Jalen tested the word, then smiled. "I like it." "Me too," Jackson agreed. Then, with the innocence only a 4-year-old could possess, he asked the question that hung unspoken between the adults. "Does this mean you and Mama will get married again?" Kendria and Maverick's eyes met over the boys' heads. "That's complicated, buddy," Maverick said carefully. "Why?" Jackson pressed. "You love us, right? With everything I have. And you love Mama?" Maverick didn't look away from Kendria when he answered. This wasn't how he'd planned to say it, not in front of the boys, not with Gloria listening, not like this. But truth had its own timeline. "Yes," he said simply. "I love your mama. I've always loved your mama." "Then, why not?" Jalen announced with 4-year-old certainty. "You love Mama, and you love us. That's a family." Out of the mouths of children came wisdom that adults spent years trying to articulate. Kendria was crying harder now, but she was smiling too. Sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out, baby. Even when the love is there. You're gonna try? Jackson asked, looking between his parents with hope shining in his eyes. Please. Maverick looked at Knewℹ, the question reflected in his gaze. She nodded, just slightly. We'll try. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a promise of happily ever after, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, a beginning was everything. 3 months after the airport encounter, the Bronzeville Technology and Education Center held its grand opening. The entire neighborhood turned out. Children explored the computer labs with wide eyes. Teenagers checked out the recording studio for the music program. Parents signed up for evening classes in coding and digital literacy. Local politicians gave speeches about community investment and the importance of accessible education. The January afternoon was crisp and beautiful, the kind of day that made Chicago feel like the best city in the world. Knewℹ stood at the entrance, ready to cut the ribbon, looking radiant in a dress the color of autumn leaves. Her natural hair was styled in an intricate crown of braids. She glowed with confidence, with purpose, with the kind of beauty that came from being exactly where you were meant to be. Maverick watched from the crowd, Jalen perched on his shoulders, while Jackson stood beside Knewℹ holding one end of the ribbon. Mama looks pretty, Jalen announced, loud enough for people nearby to hear and smile. She does, Maverick agreed. Your mama is the most beautiful person I've ever known. Gloria stood beside him, and she reached over to pat his arm. You did good with this place, she said. Not just the money, but listening to what the community actually needed. That takes humility. I had a good teacher, Maverick replied, nodding toward Knewℹ. You did, Gloria agreed. And you're learning. Slowly. But you're learning. It was the closest thing to approval he'd gotten from Gloria. And it meant more than any business award ever had. Knewℹ made a short speech about the center's mission, about opportunity and education, and the brilliant young minds in this community who deserved every chance to succeed. Then she cut the ribbon to enthusiastic applause, and the crowd surged inside. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune approached Maverick an hour later, notepad in hand. Mr. Ashford, could I get a statement about your investment in this neighborhood? Maverick set Jalen down, keeping hold of his hand. Sure. This community has taught my sons and me what really matters. For too long, I measured success in dollars and deals. But real success isn't measured in billions. It's measured in lives you touch, futures you help build, communities you strengthen. And the executive director, Ms. Mitchell, is your ex-wife, correct? The mother of your children? Knewℹ Mitchell, Maverick said firmly, is the strongest, most principled person I know. She protected our sons when I couldn't, raised them to be extraordinary, and had the grace to let me back into their lives when she had every reason not to. Any success this center achieves is because of her vision and her leadership. The reporter scribbled notes. That's quite an endorsement. It's just the truth. Knewℹ appeared at his side then, Jackson's hand in hers, creating a tableau of family that the reporter's photographer quickly captured. The four of them together, surrounded by the community center they had built, surrounded by the life they were carefully constructing. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the boys were home with Gloria, Maverick and Knewℹ stood in the empty center, looking at what they'd created together. Thank you, she said quietly. For this. For all of it. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Part of their lives. Part of... She kissed him. After 3 months of careful distance, of professional boundaries, of rebuilding trust inch by painful inch, she kissed him. And Maverick felt like he'd finally come home. If you've stayed with us this far, you know this isn't just a story about a billionaire and his secret children. It's a story about what love actually requires. Because love without courage is just performance. It's showing up for the easy moments while disappearing when things get hard. It's saying the right words while taking the safe actions. It's choosing comfort over character. Real love requires courage. The courage to be uncomfortable. The courage to fight for what matters. The courage to sacrifice what you want for what the people you love need. Sometimes, protection looks like distance. Knewℹ kept her children from their father not out of cruelty, but out of love. A fierce, protective love that would. rather bear the burden alone than watch her sons be diminished by a world that might never accept them fully. Was she right? Was she wrong? Maybe the truth is that impossible choices don't have right answers. They only have the best answers we can find in moments of fear and love and hope. Redemption isn't a single grand gesture. It's not a check you write or a speech you give. Redemption requires daily choice. It's showing up when you'd rather sleep in. It's choosing the hard conversation over comfortable silence. It's becoming, bit by bit, the person you should have been all along. Family isn't about blood. It's not about DNA or last names or who shares your features. Family is about showing up. It's about being there for the ordinary moments that make up a life. It's about choosing people and being chosen in return. Being uncomfortable is the price of growth. Maverick had to leave his world of privilege and enter a community where he was the outsider. He had to face his failures without the cushion of money or power to protect him. He had to become small before he could become who he needed to be. And second chances, they're possible when we're willing to truly change, not perform change, not pretend change, but actually become different people than we were before. So let me ask you, what would you do for your family? How far would you go for love? Would you give up your empire? Would you cut ties with parents who couldn't accept your choices? Would you risk everything you'd built for a chance at something real? The answer to those questions determines the life you'll live and the family you'll have. 5 years later, the beach on Martha's Vineyard was everything Knewℹ had once dreamed of. Small, intimate, just 40 guests, real friends, chosen family, the people who'd watched them break and rebuild and finally become what they were meant to be. The October sun was warm on their skin. The ocean whispered its eternal rhythm, and Knewℹ walked barefoot through the sand toward the man who'd lost her, found her, and spent 5 years proving he deserved a second chance. Jalen and Jackson stood as groomsmen, 9 years old now, looking serious and proud in their suits. Though they'd abandoned their shoes an hour ago, their dress pants rolled up to their knees. Gloria officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion. "I've watched these two find their way back to each other," Gloria said, her voice carrying over the sound of waves. "And let me tell you, it wasn't pretty. There were arguments in my kitchen that had me reaching for my blood pressure medication. There were tears. There were moments I thought they were both being stubborn fools." The guests laughed. Even Maverick's parents, who'd eventually come around, won over by their grandsons. Charm and Knewℹ's refusal to be anything other than herself managed small smiles. "But that's what real love looks like," Gloria continued. "It's messy, it's complicated, it's choosing to show up even when it's hard, it's putting your children first while also showing them what partnership looks like. It's forgiveness, not just once, but daily, in small ways and large." Maverick held Knewℹ's hands, their sons standing between them, creating a circle of family. She wore a simple white dress that moved with the ocean breeze. Her hair was natural and free, decorated with small white flowers Jackson had picked that morning. She was barefoot, beautiful, exactly herself. "Knewℹ and Maverick have written their own vows," Gloria announced. "And hopefully these ones will stick better than the first set." "Mama," Knewℹ protested, laughing. "Maverick went first, Knewℹ. 5 years ago, you gave me the gift of truth, even when it hurt. You showed me that love without courage is just performance. You taught me that being uncomfortable is the price of growth. I promise to keep growing, keep showing up, keep choosing us, all of us, every single day. I promise to be the man our sons see when they look at me, someone who loves their mother with his whole heart." Knewℹ's vows were simpler. "I spent 5 years building walls to protect myself and our boys. You spent 5 years patiently proving you deserve to be let in. Today, I'm choosing to believe. I'm choosing to trust. I'm choosing us. Not because it's safe or easy, but because love is always a risk worth taking. Let's take it together." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that looked nothing like the ostentatious jewelry from their first wedding. These rings were about substance, not show. "Can we get cake now?" Jalen stage whispered, making everyone laugh. "Not yet, baby," Knewℹ said. her eyes never leaving Maverick's face. Gloria pronounced them married again, and this time it meant something real. This time it was built on truth and sacrifice and daily choices to be better. Maverick kissed his wife while their sons cheered, and the small gathering of people who actually mattered applauded. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink, the family of 4 stood together at the water's edge. Jalen and Jackson ran ahead, chasing waves, their laughter carrying on the wind. Kendria leaned into Maverick, his arm around her waist, and he marveled at how far they'd come. From the sterile perfection of a private jet terminal to the warm chaos of a brownstone kitchen. From a marriage that looked perfect on paper to one that was perfectly imperfect in practice. From strangers who'd once loved each other to a family that had chosen each other, again and again, despite every obstacle. No regrets? Kendria asked softly. Maverick thought about the company he'd lost. Harrison had taken it, just as threatened. He thought about the fortune he'd spent rebuilding smaller, staying local, prioritizing presence over profit. He thought about the relationships he'd severed, the comfort he'd abandoned, the life he'd left behind. Then he looked at his sons running through the waves, at his wife glowing in the sunset, at the life they'd built together. Not a single one, he said, because love wasn't about perfect timing or ideal circumstances. Love wasn't about meeting family expectations or societal standards. Real love was about choosing each other even when it was difficult, about protecting each other even when apart, about finding your way back when the world tried to tell you it was impossible. It was about 2 little boys who deserved to know both their parents loved them fiercely, about a woman strong enough to stand alone but wise enough to accept partnership when it was offered genuinely, about a man who learned that billions meant nothing if you didn't have anyone real to share them with. The white billionaire and the black attorney, the father who didn't know and the mother who protected, the family that shouldn't work but did because love, real love, didn't care about should or shouldn't. It just was, and that was enough. That was everything. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in second chances and real love and families that fight their way back to each other, do me a favor, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Mr. Roman's Story Vault so you never miss another story that reminds us what actually matters in life. Because stories like this, stories about redemption and courage and choosing, love, even when it costs everything, these are the stories we need. These are the stories that remind us who we want to be. Thank you for staying with Maverick and Kendria and Jalen and Jackson. Thank you for believing that people can change, that families can heal, that love can win. Until the next story, remember, the life you want is worth fighting for, and it's never too late to become who you should have been all along.